Alright, so that covers the individual hits in our snare pattern. And now we'll go to the snare main chain, and I'm going to show you what's running on all the snares together. So if we just kick over here, you can see right here is the end of the drum rack. And here starts our plugin chain that operates on all of the snares. So first one we got here is Psp Vintage Warmer. Totally a go-to plugin, love this plugin. And this one allows me to add some analog saturation to it, some drive. So I've got some drive, and that's pretty much all I'm using this plugin for. It also has a compressor and some EQs in it, but I'm not using those in this case. I'm adding some additional drive to it using Ableton's saturator. So I'm using a bit of drive, and I've reduced the output so that it stays nice and consistent. Then I'm using an EQ, and I'm using the EQ to roll off just a little bit of the high end. And I should actually be using this to roll off some of the low end too. So I'm going to activate this low end roll off, and I'm going to roll this right up to 60-70 hertz there. So again, I'm capping off the bottom end that we really don't need if any of it happens to have made it through. And then we have a compressor. So let's listen to this. Now, the compressor is really going to get the sound to pop. Now, I've also got a limiter on the main beats, so I'm just going to deactivate that so you can hear what this sounds like without the limiter on it. So you can hear pre-limiter what the compression's doing. So the settings on here are very specific to get right. So what we have the attack. And the reason why I've backed off the attack here to 84 milliseconds is it's allowing the first kind of chubby part of the snare to come through. And then I'm using some pretty heavy settings on the compressor so it squashes everything else. So it adds a really punchy front end to the snare so it hits really, really hard, which is what I want. So, and then I want the compressor to spring back pretty quickly, so I have the release down at 17 milliseconds. And I've cranked the ratio down so visually I can see it's getting quite a bit of gain reduction. And the threshold and the ratio are set, so yeah, it's compressing quite hard. So let's have another look at this. You can hear that front end to the note. Awesome. So I'm going to leave that like that. And an important thing as well that you want to be monitoring as you're going through your track is you want to be monitoring the frequency spectrum. And the reason why you're doing that is because when you get to the mastering stage, if you haven't rolled out enough of the low end in your track, and a lot of sub is sneaking through from elements where it really shouldn't be, then you're going to have a lot of trouble in the mastering process, and you're going to need to go back and re-EQ everything. So I really want you guys to have like super fat, punchy, loud beats. So you got to stay with me on this one. Use frequency analyzers, spectrum analyzers. So Ableton has one built in. You just take this bad boy and you drop it right here. And what this will do is it's going to show you the EQ curve. So now I'm going to play my snares, and we're going to see how they're looking. So as you can see, there's really nothing going on in this range right here. You know, this is like 100 hertz and down, and you really don't need that range in your snares. So the reason why there isn't any of that going on is because I've been really careful to filter and EQ out at every stage the bottom end out of my snares. And that's going to allow the audio that does get through to be way more punchy and way more loud than if I hadn't done that. So this is a good practice to get into. I would use spectrum analyzers on pretty much everything so you can watch your EQ curves. Alright, now we're going to talk about another one of my favorite plugins. So what I've done here is I've taken the snares and the kicks and I've grouped them together. The way you do that in Ableton is you would click on two tracks and you hit Command G on the Mac, or you just right click and you can go group, usually when you have, if they're not in a group already. So on this group, or a bus or a stem, as it's alternatively referred, I have a limiter. I'm going to activate this limiter, and in this case I'm using isotope ozone. There's a lot of different limiters, including one built into Live, but this is the one that I know the best and I like the sound of the best. So there's a lot of different modules in this limiter because it has other functions. It's a mastering plugin, but I'm just using the Loudness Maximizer, which is a limiter. Now the reason why I'm doing this is I've compressed all these samples. They sound punchy. A limiter will take it to the next level. And with dance music, it's a little different than, say, mastering a piece of classical music or jazz or something like that. On that stuff, you'd want to be really careful about preserving your dynamics and your transient. Not the case with dance music. In dance music, we want it to be as loud as freaking possible, and we want it to just like punch out of the system. So what really allows us to do that is limiters. So in this case, I'm using a limiter on my main percussion elements. I don't typically use it on hi-hats and other stuff because it gets limited at the end in the mastering process. But in my process of production and writing my beats, I definitely use it on my main beats, which are the kick and the snare. So I have these bust, again, like we talked about. We have a limiter running, and I have the limiter running so that it's at its fastest possible setting, which is called clipping. So this got a speed dial here, and I have it running at clipping. I'm using the Intelligent 2 mode, and I've cranked the threshold down so I'm getting like kind of 4 to 5 decibels of limiting on the hits. So let's just play this and listen to how it sounds. Good, so you can see the limiter working, and again, that's what's giving our main kick and snare that super, super punchy, in-your-face kind of sound. So that's ozone and limiting, which is kind of the last of my favorite plugins when it comes to writing percussion.